This week's First Person segment welcomes Congressman John Carney to our studio. Thanks for sitting down with us for this one-on-one, Congressman.
Great to be with you today.
You know, we're fresh off the Memorial Day holiday, a day to honor our servicemen and women, and we have this latest VA scandal, and it really stings. These allegations that veterans who were waiting on medical care died, particularly in Tucson, Arizona. What have you heard from the VA here in Ellesmere? I mean, we have 80,000 veterans here in Delaware.
Well, first of all, the Vice President likes to say that the only sacred obligation that the nation has is to prepare men and women when we send them to war and to take care of them when we get home. So it does sting. It really hurts, and it's very painful to find out that what's happening out in Phoenix. I think the real question is this an isolated situation, or do we have similar problems across the country? Our congressional delegation here in Delaware, Senator Carper, Senator Coons, and myself, we actually stay pretty close to the VA hospital here in Wilmington. I would be shocked, and I would feel violated at some level if there was something going on that we didn't know about. Senator Coons has written a letter to the director out there asking if they have a similar problem and can we learn more about it. So this is a sacred obligation that we have, and we need to make sure that it's not happening here and to correct problems across the country.
Has there been a response to that letter yet?
Not to my knowledge, that there hasn't been a response. But as I said, I checked all our case files. You know, here in Delaware, people feel pretty connected to their elected officials, and they'll call us up, they'll tell us if they're having a problem. We had a problem a couple years ago with veterans getting mental health services. They created a new unit out there. They hired additional providers, and they're doing a much better job at that. So we would normally find out about something if there was a waiting list that was causing problems, health problems for our veterans. And so far we've not heard that, but we will continue to look into it.
There was an amendment to the Affordable Care Act that you introduced that recently passed in the House, and the measure exempts expatriate health care plans from Affordable Care Act requirements. Why is that significant to Delaware?
So what it's really about is jobs in Delaware. About a month ago, I was working out in the YMCA at Central Y, and a guy came up to me as I was on one of the machines, and he said, "Could I interrupt you for a second?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "I work for you. I'm your congressman." He said, "Well, I'd like to know the progress of H.R. 4414. And I paused for a minute, not knowing exactly what it was. And then I remembered, I said, "Well, why do you ask?" He said, "Well, I work for Cigna up on Namens Road, and I'm one of the folks that stands to lose our jobs if a permanent fix isn't made." The delegation has been working with the administration now for 3 years to get a special exemption for these plans. These are plans for people, U.S. citizens working overseas, so somebody for DuPont maybe who's working in Brazil or in Europe or China. It also includes non-U.S. citizens working here for a period of time in the U.S. So the provider network, the kinds of services they need are entirely different than someone who gets their health care here in Delaware in the United States. So we've been trying to get an exemption so that they can compete with their international counterparts, they meaning Cigna, and 3 other U.S. companies. And it means 400 to 500 jobs for Delaware.
That was going to be my next question. You know, the amendments, though, to what's referred to as Obamacare, those are tough to pass, not to mention you're a Democrat in a GOP-run House. So how do you get a piece of legislation like this through?
Well, it was extremely difficult. We had to work, obviously, with my colleagues on the other side in the House. Fortunately, this facility is located right on the state line, adjacent to Representative Pat Meehan's district. So Pat and I work together as well as the delegation and other friends of mine on the Republican side. So we were able to get 280 votes, 60 Democratic votes. I mean, you're talking about a political backdrop where the members on my side are very reluctant to make changes. They say they want to fix the Affordable Care Act, but they are reluctant to make changes. And then on the other side, they want to repeal the whole thing. So trying to craft an amendment that threaded that needle was difficult. We were able to get it done, get it passed in the House. Now it goes to the Senate, and we hope Senator Carper and Senator Coons will work it there and get it signed by the President.
Are prospects good in the Senate, though?
We're hopeful. You know, there'll probably have to be a change to address some of the concerns that some of the outside groups, mostly immigration groups, have. But we're pretty confident that if everybody's reasonable, we can get that done.
Okay. You're a member of the Financial Services Committee, and one issue you've been working on is housing finance reform. And there is a proposal on the table that would eliminate Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and sort of give a little more authority to the private sector. But there's a risk to the 30-year mortgage. Can you explain
There's a real
that?
risk to mortgage and housing affordability. I think back to my first house. I had to buy it with my brother. My father was a co-signer. And we wouldn't have been able to do it if there wasn't the availability of a 30-year fixed mortgage to spread out those payments and make the monthly payment lower. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they are entities partly private, partly public that provide a mechanism to take that long-term interest rate risk, enabling banks to make 30-year fixed mortgages. That's some of the leftover business from the housing crisis. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were taken over by the government. They're still in government conservatorship, which means basically the taxpayers on the line for any losses. That's not a very good situation. So I've been working for about, since I went to Congress, to find ways to protect taxpayers and to preserve affordability for homeowners. Been very difficult, again, in a very divisive political climate where our committee and the committee chairman, Mr. Hensarling from Texas, he wants to have complete privatization, which we believe would jeopardize the availability of the 30-year fixed mortgage, make it much more difficult for people to afford that first home and subsequent homes.
Does it have a lot of support?
We actually do have a fair amount of support. There's the chairman, we don't think, has the support on his own side because members, Republicans, recognize how important that the 30-year fixed mortgage is to housing affordability and to getting the American dream. And so we're positioning our bill to provide an outlet for Mr. Hensarling should he choose to go forward.
I want to talk about the political climate in Washington. You know, the last time you were here, I feel like we were talking about how divisive it was along party lines. Wondering if that's still the same.
Well, the one question that I get when I'm home here in Delaware from people is, how are things going? And Senator Carper likes to say, compared to what? And if you compare the way things are today to how they were when I first went to Congress in 2011, I think things are getting better. And I think the reason for that is members are going back to their districts, whatever state they're from and whatever their district might look like, if it's overwhelmingly Democratic or overwhelmingly Republican. And people are just fed up. And they're telling their members, look, go back and get something done, deal with our fiscal challenges, do something to help businesses create jobs, deal with the unfinished business there in Washington. And I think people are more willing to do it. We actually passed the budget the first time since I was elected. We passed a farm bill, which is a very difficult piece of legislation to pass. We passed a fix to the flood insurance program, which, again, difficult legislation. We still have a lot of unfinished business, but things seem to be getting a little better in my view.
Okay, we're going to be wrapping up shortly, but one more question: up for re-election for a third term this year. What are you anticipating for the campaign?
Well, we'll go from one end of the state to the other, talking about what I'm trying to do in Washington, talking about trying to bring Democrats and Republicans together to bring what I call the Delaware way to Washington, which is putting our political differences aside and doing the best thing for the state, in my case, for the whole country. That's the approach that I've tried to take, and Delawareans that I talk to, that's what they want me to do.
Okay. Congressman John Carney, thank you so much for your time.
Great to
and
be with you.
Look forward to sitting down with you again in the future. This interview can be found online at newsworks.org/Delaware.